Breaking news always arrives the same way: fast, loud, and one-sided. But what happens when the story they rush to print doesn't match the reality unfolding behind the cameras? This is the case of Charlie Kirk, a name you've heard before, a voice that has divided America. To his followers, he's a fighter for their beliefs. To his critics, he's a dangerous manipulator. Whether you agree with him or despise him, one truth remains: Charlie Kirk doesn't walk into a room unnoticed. And on the night of the event, that spotlight would become his curse. The headlines flashed across screens within minutes. Charlie Kirk targeted in shocking event. News anchors spoke with urgency but not clarity. The images they showed were fragmented, clipped, and carefully selected. Within an hour, the narrative was locked. Kirk was the victim. The chaos was random, and the story was already being tied with a bow. But pause for a moment. If you look closer, really closer, what you see doesn't match what you're being told. Early reports contradicted each other. Witnesses described confusion inside the venue, yet official statements painted it as orderly. One outlet claimed the cameras captured everything. Another admitted entire minutes were missing. And while the world was glued to their phones, one detail slipped by unnoticed. His own security team was acting out of step. This was supposed to be protection. Instead, it looks like surveillance, watching him, questioning him, moving in ways that didn't add up. And that's why you're here, because the official story is the easiest one to believe, but the easiest story is rarely the true one. If you want to hear the parts they never report, subscribe now, because without you, stories like this disappear before the truth can be uncovered. The timeline of that night is more than just numbers on a clock. It's a sequence of decisions, hesitations, and unexplained gaps that turn an ordinary event into a mystery. The official story begins at 7:03 p.m. Charlie Kirk steps on stage. The crowd rises, cameras flash, and security positions themselves around him. But pay close attention, because from the very first minute, things are already out of alignment. At 7:10, a disruption near the back row. Several audience members shift in their seats. Witnesses describe raised voices, but instead of reacting, the guards hesitate. Their eyes move not toward the crowd, but back to Kirk. One security officer even steps sideways, blocking Kirk's path, not protecting him. By 7:15, footage shows two cameras briefly cutting out. Not the live stream cameras, but the internal surveillance. Those missing seconds may seem small, but in cases like this, it's the small pieces that matter most. Why would a live venue, packed with paying guests, suddenly lose visual coverage just as tensions began to rise?
At 7:20, Kirk pauses mid-sentence. His gaze moves to his left, caught on footage. He's distracted not by the crowd, but by two members of his own security detail whispering into their earpieces. Their posture is wrong, not defensive, not scanning the room. Focused inward, talking only to each other. And then, 7:23, the silence. Eyewitnesses report a chilling stillness. It's the kind of moment that sticks with you. Guards shift position, but not toward the commotion. Instead, they move away from Kirk, almost as if making space. The audience doesn't notice, the cameras don't linger. But the timeline does not lie. Security was not reacting to the threats around Kirk, they were reacting to him. Every minute tells a different story. Every camera angle leaves you with more questions than answers. And while the media frames this as random, the sequence suggests something calculated. If this feels off to you, subscribe right now. Because the truth isn't trending unless we make it trend together. Every crime story has its shadows, and in this one, the darkest shadows aren't cast by strangers in the crowd, they're cast by the people closest to Charlie Kirk that night, his own security team. So, who were they? Not just nameless guards in black suits. Each of them had a past, and when you pull on those threads, patterns begin to emerge. One member had worked overseas, attached to private contractors linked to controversial operations. Another was dismissed from a prior detail after a breach of protocol yet somehow found his way back into high-profile work. And a third, no record at all, almost as if his file was scrubbed clean. These weren't random hires, they were handpicked. But by who? Sources point to an outside contracting agency brought in just weeks before the event. Why replace long-standing staff with new faces right before a high-stakes appearance? That decision alone raises more questions than answers. And then there are the assignments. When we trace their previous work, a disturbing pattern emerges. They were present at other events marked by unexplained disturbances, always nearby, always watching, always leaving behind more confusion than clarity. Now let's replay their actions from that night, moment by moment. At 7:10 hesitation during the disruption. Instead of shielding Kirk, they held back. At 7:22 members whisper, ignoring the crowd completely. At 7:23 formation breaks. Not to close in on Kirk, but to open space around him. At 7:31 member makes direct eye contact with another, nods, and steps aside. These aren't the movements of men protecting a client. They're the movements of men following a different script. And yet, after the event, not a single member of this team has spoken publicly. No interviews, no clarifications, no statements, silence, absolute silence. When the people closest to the truth stay silent, your subscription is a vote against silence. If you're here to keep these questions alive, subscribe now because in cases like this, silence isn't protection, it's complicity. By now, the story looks less like chaos and more like choreography. But speculation alone doesn't carry weight. Evidence does. And when we sift through what's been leaked, what's been sealed, and what insiders have whispered, a disturbing picture comes into focus. Let's begin with the documents. Shortly after the event, internal reports were filed, stamped with redactions from top to bottom. Whole paragraphs blacked out, and yet a few fragments slipped through. Words like operational failure, protocol breach, and most chilling of all, intentional non-response. Those aren't the phrases of an accident, they're the language of a cover-up. Then, the sealed reports, requests for access were denied under the veil of national security. Think about that. A public figure targeted inside a controlled venue. And somehow the aftermath falls under the same secrecy used for classified missions. That's not routine, it's deliberate obstruction. Journalists tried to push back. Independent reporters noted inconsistencies between the official timeline and eyewitness accounts. One claimed an insider told him the security team had been instructed to stand down in the event of disruption. Another revealed that key surveillance tapes were locked away within hours, never shown again. And then there are the theories. Some say this was a political message meant to shake Kirk's influence from the inside out. Others believe it was a loyalty test, to see how far the public would swallow a story, no matter how thin. It's not the first time suspicions like these have surfaced. History is filled with cases where protection turns into betrayal. From high-profile assassinations to staged incidents designed to control public opinion, the pattern is always the same. Those closest to the target hold the most power to alter the outcome. So, ask yourself, was this incompetence or intention? Were the guards simply unprepared? Or were they executing a plan no one was meant to see? Subscribe if you believe cover-ups collapse when enough eyes are watching. Because secrecy only survives in the dark and you are the light they can't control. The hours after any high-profile event are the most critical. Details are raw, stories conflict, and truth is fragile. But in this case, the narrative wasn't fragile at all, it was sealed. Fast, too fast. Authorities moved within minutes, issuing a statement that framed the event as contained. Their language was polished, rehearsed, as if drafted long before the night even began. The words they chose were precise, isolated, unexpected, no ongoing threat. But how can a statement of certainty arrive before the facts are even collected? By morning, the official story was locked in. Reporters across networks repeated the same lines, word for word. It was less like news and more like a script. But look closer, and you'll see the cracks. One outlet reported a technical failure in the surveillance feed, while another insisted there was no interruption at all. A local paper mentioned two witnesses removed from the venue, yet national coverage never acknowledged it. Contradictions stacked up, but the machine kept moving forward louder, faster, drowning out the noise of doubt. And then there's the silence of those who mattered most. Kirk's closest allies, usually outspoken, vanished from public view. Family members declined interviews, associates who normally lived in front of cameras had nothing to say. Why? Was it grief or fear? Silence is rarely neutral. It's often the loudest answer of all. In the aftermath, the truth didn't just blur, it was buried. And every shovel of dirt came not from the chaos of that night, but from the institutions that were supposed to reveal what really happened. If this silence troubles you, subscribe now. Because truth doesn't survive in the dark, and without you, it never sees the light. By now, the pieces should form a clear picture. But instead of clarity, we're left with shadows. And shadows always mean unanswered questions. First, why were certain members of Kirk's security team never investigated? Their actions on camera were unusual. Their hesitation documented. Yet when the inquiry began, their names never appeared. No questioning, no follow-up, no accountability. In cases like this, even bystanders are asked to testify. So why not the men standing closest to him? Then the surveillance tapes. Multiple angles existed that night, but only fragments have been released. Entire minutes are missing, erased from public record. The justification: technical error. But technical errors don't explain why the surviving footage is under lock and key, classified and sealed from outside review. And perhaps the most disturbing excuse of all: national security. Officials claimed releasing more details would threaten stability. Think about that. A private event inside a controlled venue reclassified as a matter of state security. What threat could possibly justify that label, unless the truth itself was the danger? These are the questions left hanging in the air, questions that cut through the official story like cracks in glass. Cracks that widen the longer you stare. Subscribe if you see the cracks in the story, because cracks are where the light gets in. And without light, we're left only with the darkness of silence. When you rebuild the story from the fragments, it no longer looks like the random chaos authorities described. Instead, it begins to resemble something colder, something calculated: the betrayal of a man from within his own circle. The timeline proves hesitation where there should have been action. The security team's behavior defies the very role they were hired to play. The sealed reports, the missing tapes, the contradictions in the media layer after layer, all pointing back to one uncomfortable truth. If those tasked with protecting Charlie Kirk were instead watching, waiting, and stepping aside, then what we are looking at is not incompetence, it is orchestration. And if it was orchestrated, then the final question becomes the most haunting of all. If security planned it, who ordered them? That question is not answered in the headlines. It is not written in the official reports. It lives only here, in the cracks, in the silence, waiting for someone to demand an answer. And that someone is you. Subscribe, share, comment truth, because lies survive on silence, but justice only survives when voices like yours refuse to stay quiet.